Hey there, today we're going to work on number 6, systems notes, solving systems by elimination. So when you're solving systems by elimination, the first thing you're going to want to do is add, so you can add that word right in here, add the equations together. And when you add them together, one of your variables, so your x or your y, should cancel. After you add together, you're going to solve for the remaining variable. Then you're going to plug that value into the original equation and solve for the other variable. Okay, so let's make those words make sense with some math here. So when we look at number 1, I have x plus 2y equals 10, and I have negative x minus y equals negative 6. Okay, so if we're going to add these equations together, I'm going to do that by putting a line under here and an addition symbol right here. Okay, once I have those, the next thing is solve for the remaining variables. So we're going to solve for those. So if I have a negative x, I have a positive x and a negative x. So really in front of both of those letters is the number 1. So if I have 1x and I add a negative 1, that's going to give me 0 x's. So 1 plus a negative 1 turns into 0. So those two cancel out. So now I'm just going to look at this next one. I have 2y plus a negative 1y. That's going to give me 1y equals, and now I'm going to add my 10 plus a negative 6. So 10 plus a negative 6 is going to give me a 4. Remember, if you have a number in front of a letter, if it's the number 1, we can just say y equals 4. Okay, so the number 1 in front of a letter is just telling you that that's what that letter is. Okay, so we found our first one, we found our y. So step number 3 says plug that value into the original equation. So I'm going to choose that top equation, x plus 2y equals 10, or the bottom equation, negative x minus 1y equals negative 6. So I get to choose either one of those that I want. I'm going to do that top one. So when I do that, I'm just going to rewrite my x plus my 2. Those aren't going to change. But notice where this y is right here. Now I'm going to plug this y in that spot. So I'm going to use parentheses. I'm going to put that 4 in there. And then I'm just going to keep going, equals 10. So I did all of that top piece that looks like this. So all of that yellow one right there is now this. So I basically just rewrote it, but changed what that y was. Now I can solve for that. So we're going to solve the same way we usually do. So I'm going to put my line down the middle. So I still have this x, then I have 2 times 4, that's going to give me an 8, and that still equals 10. Now if I want to solve for that x, I have to get rid of that 8, so I'm going to subtract 8 on the left. And if I do that on the left, I have to do that on the right. So now those 8's are gone. I'm left with x on my left-hand side, and then I'm just going to take that 10 and subtract that 8, and that's going to give me 2. So to solve this, we're going to say that our coordinates are, remember my x comes first and then my y. So my x was a 2 and my y is a 4. So we just solved that one. Okay, so let's look at that next one. The first one says we're going to add the equations together. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a plus right here and a line right here. Okay, so if I have 2 minus a negative, I have 2 plus a negative 3, that's going to give me a negative 1x. On these ones, it's really a 1y and a negative 1y. So if you have a positive 1 and a negative 1, those two cancel out. So I'm going to cancel those out right now. Those are no longer there, so I don't have any y's left. And then I'm just going to say equals, and I could say 4 plus a negative 8, or if I just want to look at that right-hand side and just read it exactly as it is, it says 4 minus 8. So 4 plus a negative 8 or 4 minus 8 will give you that same answer. It's still going to give you a negative 4. And then before I said if you had a 1 in front of your x, you could just leave that x alone. But if you have a negative 1, that's different. You can't have a negative value. So I'm going to divide this by a negative 1. And if I divide that, I have to divide this by a negative 1. That leaves me with x on my left-hand side, and -4 divided by -1 is going to give me a +4. Okay, now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and plug it into one of my equations. You'll get the same answer, so it doesn't matter which equation you plug into. I honestly don't like to work with negative numbers. So if there's an option to choose a positive equation, I'm going to choose that one. So I'm just going to erase this top right here just so I can see that better. And now I'm going to plug that 4 into this equation right here. So I'm going to rewrite everything the way it is. But when I get to where that x is, instead of writing x, I'm going to put that 4 in there. So I'm going to start with, whoops, not like that. I'm going to start with 2. Okay, now it says x. Oops. So here is where my x is, and I'm going to plug it in with this 4 that I found. So I'm going to say 2 times 4, oops, sorry. Times 4, and then I'm just going to keep going with the rest of the equation. Plus y equals 4. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is distribute that 2 to that 4. That's going to give me an 8. So 8 plus y equals 4. And if I want to get that y by itself, I got to get rid of that 8. Right now it's a +8, so I'm going to subtract it. So those 8s are gone. Now I'm left with y equals 4 minus 8 is going to give me a -4. And now I'm going to put them in as a pair. So this is my x and this is my y. So my x was a 4 and my y was a -4. Okay, so let's look at number 3. We're going to do the same thing. The first thing we're going to do is put this equals bar underneath and put this plus out front. So I'm looking for a letter and a number that are the same letter with the same, I'm looking for the same letter that also has a number that's similar. One of them is going to be positive and one of them is going to be negative. So when I look at my x's, I have -2x and a +2x. And I have a 3y and a 2y. Well, the only ones that have the same number, that's one's positive and one's negative, are these ones right here. So those ones are going to cancel out. A -2 and a +2, whoa, geez. Those two cancel each other out. I'm going to re-cancel it with this guy right here. Okay, so now I'm just going to add straight down. So I have 3y plus 2y. That's going to give me a 5y equals, and then I'm going to add straight down with that -11 plus 6. -11 plus 6 is going to give me a -5. And now to get that y all by itself, I'm going to divide this side by 5 and divide this side by 5. And that leaves me with y equals -5 divided by 5 is going to give me a -1. Okay, so now that I have my y, the other letter I'm looking for is my x. So now I'm going to plug that y into either one of your equations. And I'm going to go ahead and erase this again so you can see what the original, because you got to plug in the original equation. So I have -2x plus 3y equals -11, or I have 2x plus 2y equals 6. Again, you could work with negative numbers. I don't really like to, so I'm going to use that lower equation. So I'm going to use this one right here. Okay, so I'm going to plug in for that one. So I'm going to start with my 2x because that's not going to change at all. So I have 2x. The plus 2 is going to stay the same, but notice that you have a y right here. And I'm going to plug that in with this value that I got right here. So I have a -1. And then I'm just going to keep going with my equation that says equals 6. Okay, so now that we have everything in its place, I'm going to go ahead and draw that line. So I have a left side and a right side. So when I look at that 2x, that's not going to change at all. So I'm going to keep that 2x. But when I have 2 with parentheses around that -1, that means I have to distribute it. And if I have 2 times -1, that's going to give me a -2. So instead of saying plus a -2, we're just going to say -2. And then we're going to keep that equals 6. So if I want to get that 2x by itself, I got to get rid of that -2 first. And I'm going to say plus 2, and that leaves me with 2x equals 8. And if I want to get that x all by itself, when a letter and number are together, they're being multiplied. So I'm going to do the opposite. So I'm going to divide by 2. And that leaves me with x equals 4. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So then I'm just going to put that as my coordinate point. So I have a 4 and I have a -1. Remember that this is my x and this is my y. So that's what order they have to go in. Okay, let's look at number 4. So I'm looking at number 4. I'm looking for a letter and a number that are exactly the same, but one's positive and one's negative. If you don't have a number in front of your letter, it's always the number 1. So I really have a 1x and a 7x, and those two are not the same values, so we're not going to do those. Okay, but I have a -1y and I have a positive 1y. So because those are the same number, well, they're not the same numbers, but you have this -1 and you have a positive 1. So I know that those two can be eliminated. So I'm going to go ahead and draw my line in right here, and then I'm going to say plus. Okay, first I start with my 1x plus 7x, and that's going to give me an 8x. Okay, if I have a -1y and a positive 1y, those two cancel each other out. So that leaves me with my 9 plus my 7, and that's going to give me 16. To get that x all by itself, I'm going to divide by 8 and divide by 8. And I get x equals 2. So now that I have my first letter done, I'm going to use that 2 that I just found, and I'm going to plug it in for an x on either the top one or the bottom one. Let's try the top one this time. It does have a negative, but we don't have to really be afraid of negatives. We can avoid them if we want to, but sometimes we might just want to try them, just make sure we're on the right track. So this first one, I'm going to start with 1x because that's how it starts. So I'm going to start with, it's not working here. 1, no, come on. Start with, why is this not working? There it goes. Okay, so I'm going to start with 1 and x. Okay, but notice that this 2 right here is my x. So I don't really want to put that x there. Instead, I want to replace it with the number I just found. And because I found a 2, I'm going to put parentheses around it and put that 2 right there. And then I'm just going to keep going. Then it says minus y equals 9. So now the first thing I'm going to do is distribute this 1 to that 2, and that's going to give me a 2. I still have minus y, and I have equals 9. Okay, if I want to get that y by itself, the first thing I got to get rid of is that 2. It's a positive 2, so I'm going to subtract 2. So now I have negative y equals 9 minus 2 is 7. Okay, so you can't have a negative y. And it's not by itself because really it's a -1 in front of that y. And you can't have a -1. So to get rid of a -1, we're going to divide by a -1. So I'm going to divide both of those by a -1. And now I get y equals -7. So my points I should have are 2, -7. Okay, let's try the second page. We got 2 more on the second page. Let's look at this number 5. I have 3x and a -2x. So those are different digits, that 3 and that 2, they're not the same digit. So I'm going to ignore those two. And then I have a -5y and a positive 5y. Because those are the same digit, you just have one positive and one negative, those are the ones we're going to cancel out. So I'm going to start by drawing my line, and I can do this plus sign right here. I know that I'm getting rid of my 5, so those aren't there anymore. Okay, so now I have 3, so I can look at this one of two ways. I can say 3 plus a -2, or I can kind of ignore that plus is there and just say 3 minus 2. I'm going to ignore that plus, and I'm going to say 3 minus 2. Either way, I'm going to get the same answer. I get a 1x. So 1x is on my left equals, now I have a -35, and I have a 30. So notice that 30 on the bottom is positive. So if I take a -35 and I add a positive 30, that's going to leave me with a -5. Remember, if you have just the number 1 in front of your x, if it's not negative, you can just go right ahead and say x equals -5. You don't have to go and divide it by that 1 because it's not going to change your number. Okay, so now that I have that one, I'm going to go back and look and see which one of my original equations do I want to substitute this 5 into. So the 5 is an x, so I'm going to have to, so I'm going to have to put that x in somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this first one right here. So I want to replace it with that right there. So I'm going to use this whole equation. First, I'm going to write that what I can write out, But when I get to that x part, when I'm at that x, I'm going to stick in that -5. So I'm going to start with my 3. Okay, now I'm at the x, so I want to put that -5 in there. And then I'm just going to keep going with the whole equation. Minus 5y equals -35. Okay, 3 times -5 is -15. And I still have this minus 5y, and I still have -35. Okay, to get my 5y all by itself, I'm going to have to get rid of that -15. So the opposite of minus 15 is plus 15. So I'm going to add 15 here, I'm going to add 15 here. So now I have -5y equals, if I have -35 and I add 15, that's going to get me to 20. Sorry, it's going to be a -20. So a good way to determine your positives and negatives, what they're going to be, my -35 is a bigger digits than my positive 15. So because that -35 is a bigger digit wise, you have to look at your negative is going to stay there. It's not going to go away, because if you only go ahead 15, you haven't crossed that 0 threshold, so you're not in the positive area yet. Okay, so now to get that -5 away from that y, I'm going to divide by -5. And divide by -5, and that leaves me with y equals 4. So now I have my two coordinates. My x is -5, and my y is a positive 4. That -20 and that -5 brings me to a positive 4. Okay, and one last one. This one I'm going to have you change just a little bit, just so we can work with a number that is not an exact, like a whole number. I want you to have like a decimal number. So keep that top one the same. We're going to say -4x plus 2y equals 8. But that bottom one, I want you to write this. I want you to write 4x minus 4y equals -10. Okay, so take a moment here. If you have to pause, you can, but take a moment to write those two, rewrite those two. The top one did not change at all. That bottom one, I want you to change that -3 to a -4. Okay, and then we're gonna go ahead and do the same thing we did before. Here's our equals bar, here's our addition. I'm gonna look for a letter that has a positive number and a negative number, and they're gonna be the same. So when I look, my x's, I have a -4 and a positive 4, so I know those two are gonna be eliminated. And then I'm just gonna add straight down with my other ones. So I have a positive 2 plus a -4, or I could just say 2 minus 4. If I take 2 minus 4, the 4 is a bigger digit, so I know that negative is going to stay. So I'm going to say -2y equals, and if I have 8 minus 10, I'm going to still have a -2. Okay, if I want my y all by itself, I'm going to divide by that -2 and divide by a -2. And that leaves me with y equals a positive 1. You have a negative on the top and a negative on the bottom. When you're multiplying or dividing, those negatives cancel each other out, so it turns into a positive 1. So now that I have that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to fill it, and I'm not going to use these two. I'm going to use one of my other ones. So I'm going to use my -4x plus 2y equals 8, or I'm going to say my 4x minus 4y equals -10. I'm going to do that bottom one just so we have a little bit more practice with negatives. So I'm going to do this one right here. So I'm going to rewrite that out. So my 4 is not going to change. So I'm going to say 4. Why is it not working again? My pencil's being a little funky today. So I'm going to say 4. There it goes. My x is not going to change, so I'm going to leave it an x. Minus my 4 is not going to change. But notice that the letter we found was y. So when we get to this y, now we're going to use parentheses and stick that 1 in there. And then I'm just going to keep going with the rest of the equation. So I'm going to say equals -10. Okay, so now my 4x stays a 4x. I have -4 equals -10. To get rid of, I want my 4x all by itself. So to get rid of that 4x, or sorry, to get that 4x all by itself, I got to get rid of that -4. So the opposite of -4 is +4. So I'm going to add 4 here. If I add 4 here, I have to add 4 right there. That eliminates those two. So now I have 4x equals -10 plus 4. It's going to give me a -6. And then to get that x all by itself, I'm going to divide by 4. And if I divide by 4 on that side, I'm going to divide by 4 on this side. So that leaves me with x all by itself equals -6 divided by 4 is going to give me a -1.5. So for this one, my x is going to be a -1.5 and my y is a 1. Okay, you are all set. You have everything you need for your note 6. So go ahead and start working on that. This is your note sheet, so I hope you should have done your note sheet along with me. Don't just watch it, just do the note sheet along with me while I do it, and then go ahead and move on to your homework assignment.